ngā mihi nui ki a tātou I mihara watu ki te ia koutou I tēnei wā. Great to see you all and looking forward to an invigorating Auckland Transport Board meeting today. Ngā mihi nui ki a tātou anō, nei te karakia. Ke noi tātou, whakatakata te hau ki te uru, whakatakata te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai I hi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he hoka, he hauhu, ti hei Māori ora.
Kia ora. Kia ora tātou. So just a couple of comments from me. We have a very full agenda as per usual, both with the open board meeting and also those matters to be dealt with in closed session. If I could just acknowledge the huge amount of work which has gone on and is still going on to support the massive vaccination effort which is going on in Auckland and throughout New Zealand, but particularly obviously with Auckland Transport in Auckland. We've had really good feedback about our various AT staff members, particularly the parking and harbour master people who have been assisting in various traffic management and other practical ways, and it was really heartening to read that we have also been delivering food parcels provided by Marae to vulnerable families. So there's a lot of suffering currently in Auckland because of the impacts of the lockdown in many ways, and people, including AT, are trying to go out of our way to help us get through. And so that was just what I wanted to particularly acknowledge. We've got a full agenda and I'm keen to get on with it. So I will now ask if there are any late items for general business. Okay. In the interest register, are there any changes or matters people want to declare an interest in today that they have not already declared? No, thank you. Could I now look at the draft open session minutes of the 30th of September? And were there any corrections to those?
Not from me, Madam Chair.
Okay. I can't remember the page, and I'm just having difficulty getting all my screens up and running because of my connectivity issues. Could I? There was something where I referred to the importance of vaccination being having financial implications. That was a simplification. What I was meaning is it would have economic and social implications. Not just that it would have financial implications that could be misread. And I wondered if there, so with that, that the board approves the minutes of the previous meeting held on 30th of September. Yes, I get agreement to that.
Yes.
Thank you. Welcome to our councillors too. I thought you were the governing body today. I take it that you will need to leave at some point. If we could now move on to the action register, there are two actions listed. There was also another matter that I myself had referred to, and if that, I'll just mention that to Andrew and make sure that gets picked up for the next action register. If we could now turn to the business reports. Jane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, just two or three highlights from me in the open report, and one of them you have touched on already. I'll come to that in a minute. But they're all very early in the report. Page 2, clearly our environment right now means that we have had to move a number of consultations and engagements online we are making efforts to ensure people are aware of that, but it will obviously hamper engagement. And it's come at I guess at a time when we usually stop consultations in the run up to Christmas right through to the end of January. So, I mean, unless we were to pause most of our capital program and even things like the speed limits bylaw, it does force us into the space that we're in. It's not ideal, but it is what it is. And who's to know what's to happen in 2022? So I think it's the right call that has been made. It will mitigate some of the delays, but it won't mitigate all of them. The team is working through what that will do for our program moving forward. On page 3 of the report, as I said, Madam Chair, I did want to pick up on the vaccination progress. I heard this morning I was at a Auckland Council and CCOCE's meeting. There are over 60 sites across the region where either Auckland Council and or Auckland Transport are contributing by either making sites and land available, by providing traffic management support, or by our teams who are out there. And I do want to call out, like about 12 months ago, we made the decision to go to a sub-regional geographic engagement model, particularly in the stakeholder and communications team, and that is making a real difference in circumstances which we didn't actually contemplate there being benefits of, but it is, and it's helping too, because some of those communities are seeing people that look like them fronting and leading those teams. So I do want to call that out. It's been a really strong effort, and it's been one where we've had the opportunity to work with councillors, particularly in the south and west, around that. And on page 5, I do want to call out the Ngā Kaihui program. The report itself doesn't say it, but we have increased the numbers of graduates and interns this year by 50%, despite the circumstances we find ourselves in terms of funding and COVID-related patronage impacts. The reality is that, we are in a tight labour market, and the graduate program that we've had over the last 4 years or so has delivered some really strong opportunities for young people, our rangatahi, that are out there in the community. And given the nature of the program as we look forward and the growth in that program, given the labour market, it just was, it was a kind of a no-brainer to expand the program as we move forward. So they're the things I wanted to call out, and happy for any questions for myself or the team that is here. Can I just mention that Roger Jones, unfortunately, is not here today. He's just had an operation, and we'll be back on deck in a week or two.
Okay, if we could just use the hand signals, that would be great for comments or questions, starting with you, Wayne.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, thank you for calling those things out and for your opening, Adrian. I think it's really good to see that community engagement going across the board and going beyond really Call of Duty. It's fantastic to see. So I'm really pleased you've highlighted it. There's a couple of things, Shane. On page 17 of the report, there's a bit there about active modes update, and that reflects on a bit of deep diving going on and study going on about what we're learning about active modes on our networks and things like that. And elsewhere, I think on the agenda, there's the deep dive into the vulnerable users and what's happening with them and those kinds of things. My question is, we rely on a long supply chain to deliver this thing. So I'm just wondering what the intention is in terms of bringing our consultants and contractors along this journey of learning, because we do rely on them for resources to sort of repurpose the network and do our maintenance and all that kind of thing.
Perhaps I'll have first go at it, and then either Andrew or Mark Lambert might like to add. You're quite right, Wayne. And when programs come up like the Innovating Streets program at short notice, and we have big, they're not huge dollar programs, but there was well over 30 Innovating Streets projects in Auckland over the last 12 months, then we are reliant. We are reliant on our broader supply chain in terms of this. And more broadly, I think one of the things we've been considering, really giving deep thought to, Wayne, is in the context of climate change, in the context of where we've been in terms of active modes, how do we accelerate? And one of the things that's come out of the RLTP change program is looking at how we procure as a program. And there are conversations obviously going on with Nicole and Waka Kotahi about streamlining funding arrangements for the cycling program and the safety program at the moment. So look, there's real opportunities there, and some of the things we committed to in Adrian's letter, or the chair's letter back to the mayor, are well underway in terms of appointments. And that can only bring more focus and more energy and pace and consideration of some of those factors that you've talked about. Mark or Andrew, did you want to add anything more?
Thanks, Shane. Yeah, a couple of other comments I'll probably make to that is that we do have some existing partnering collaboration mechanisms for contracting and procurement, which we do utilise quite often, such as our professional services panel, which is already in place, which we can access pretty quickly, and our physical works panels. But also we are looking at other opportunities as well, such as, for example, the safety programme, the minor works programme there, we are bundling into larger geographical contract areas, looking at aligning D&C, and also in our new road maintenance contracts, we can start to include physical works and minor projects in there, not just renewals and maintenance as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. The emphasis of my question is more in, as we're finding out more, what are we doing to upskill and raise the awareness of our supply chain? Otherwise, we can procure all we like, but if they're not on the learning journey with us, they're not going to respond in the way we want, or have the capability to respond in the way we want. So it was really
okay. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So we do have regular forums, particularly with our designers and professional services companies, where we share continuous improvement and learnings. I think they're on a monthly basis with the professional services industry, and with our contractors. We do meet up regularly and share knowledge as well, particularly through our contractual mechanisms and relationships.
Yeah.
Does that cover that, Wayne?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Jim.
Kia ora, Adrian. Kia ora, Shane. Ngā mihi. Yeah, I just wanted to just acknowledge the work that's been done with the Ngā Kaihoi program, and be good perhaps to get a little bit of information about the selected candidates going through that program, and perhaps it's something for the People and Culture Committee, Shane, but well done there. Just wanted to, just noting the Independent Māori Statutory Board review on our Te Tio Waitangi processes and alignment. Just for you, Chair, I'm just happy to put my hand up and say keen to be a link between the board and the leadership team, and provide support on behalf of the board if I can be of any value to you and the team, Shane. I do know the CEO of the Independent Māori Statutory Board well from a previous role, and if there's any specific support I can provide, the offer is there. I just want to also acknowledge the work being done with the AT Marae safety program, and just while I have the opportunity, Chair, I thought I'd just mention that on behalf of the board, just working with council to identify a board intern, part of the Future Directors program, and we've got a really talented woman who's joining the board, extremely talented, and will be just waiting for that process to be complete with Auckland Council. Izzy Horrocks is her name.
Just Jim, I think we're still in public.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
My apologies. I won't go any further, but just wanted to also mention that as well. So she will be joining us, and looking forward to her contribution. Ngā mihi.
Ngā mihi. Kylie.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for all the work that's been going on and this business report. Throughout the report, there are a number of really good things happening, like the Innovating Streets in Papatoe, the Tamaki Drive and cycling route. Shane, you've just talked about accelerating the active modes. I guess what I'm just interested in hearing about is we've got this opportunity with COVID. We've heard about the really good work going on in terms of showing the public that PT is safe and trying to make sure that we can rebuild the public PT patronage. But it's bigger than that in terms of trying to achieve our strategic goals. So I'm just interested in, we will have had at least 12 weeks, and that's time enough for people to change their behaviour. We know a lot of people are more active in this time. I'm just interested in how we are going to nudge people to maintain how they are living going forward, so it can help us achieve our strategic goals. For instance, and I know this is a council thing as well, about taking over the streets and eating outdoors to help with the pandemic, but also the active modes. We can change the dial if people continue to behave in the way that they are at the moment. And I just think 12 weeks is a long time, and going into summer. Last time we were going into winter.
Thanks, Kylie, through you, Madam Chair. So yes, look, Council has been very strong on leading out and supporting business, supporting some of the outdoor dining opportunities, for instance, Kylie, and we are sitting in behind that, doing what we can to enable those sorts of things to occur. In terms of active modes, Vanessa and her team are very active at the moment in terms of some of the campaigns and efforts that they are making in that regard. We are seeing in terms of some of the research at the, that is coming through that Aucklanders' attitudes to riding a bike are more positive now than what they have ever been, at well over 50% in terms of positivity towards that. So that's great. I think, you know, we still have the fundamental barrier that there is not enough safe cycling infrastructure out there, and that's the real challenge, that why we've got to crack on and get this infrastructure in place as we move forward.
Thanks, Shane.
Okay, other questions, comments? I've just got one myself. I've got Wayne back on, but I'll just raise this myself, which really follows on. I was looking at the relative success of the Tamaki Drive orange cones. It might be one of the few occasions that orange cones have been quite supported by the community. I just wanted to know if we, because of just getting to the point about how long it's been in place, are we doing any evaluation of the need for a longer term temporary cycleway along that part of Tamaki Drive, that's where the orange cones are?
If Andrew Allen might be best placed to answer that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Shane. Yes, Chair. So there's currently daily monitoring going on for that particular temporary installation. We'll be assessing all of that. Obviously, what we're talking about is this has been put in to address the COVID issues. Sure. We will evaluate that post getting out of lockdown, whenever that may be, and see whether there's something more permanent, not more permanent, temporary, but kind of, I'm going to say semi-permanent, that could be incorporated into our new program that's been stood up this year, funded through the RLTP, which is the existing cycleway pop-up protection. So there are a number of sections of Tamaki Drive that already have cycleway. So in this instance, what we'd be evaluating is whether or not we can create some connections between those kind of existing sections in a semi-permanent fashion.
Okay. So you'll be coming back to us with that in due course.
That's correct.
Okay, Wayne.
That's all right. Thank you, Adrian. I don't have questions.
Okay, you can take your hand down then. Right. Any other comments or observations? Right. So the board notes the report. That can be agreed. Let's now move on to the annual report, performance against the statement of intent. Mark Lang and Jenny Chetwynd.
Morena, good morning all. Purpose of this paper is largely a statutory responsibility that we need to formally report back in a public forum on performance against the SOI and the annual report. Obviously, the board has previously seen all of this material via different forums and previously seen the SOI performance. But for the purpose of this session and fulfilling that requirement, we just want to, I guess, reiterate some of the key messages for the last financial year, which does seem a very long time ago. For the 12 months to 30 June, obviously, and again, this was quite outstanding in the context, we delivered 95% of our capital program and also delivered an operating surplus. The operating surplus described in the paper is written in the context of the way it's presented in the annual report, so the numbers might not look so familiar, but the key when we're looking at those numbers is that any capital funding we receive from Waka Kotahi is recorded as revenue, and also any vested assets are recorded in these numbers as well. So from an external reporting point of view, we recorded a net operating surplus, and I'll just remind the board that from a management perspective, when we look at our operating performance internally, we did report 110 million net surplus pre-depreciation last financial year, which again was extraordinary in the circumstances. The SOI performance measures then, and I'll just quickly frame this up and then ask Jenny if she'd like to make any comments, but the SOI measures themselves, they were significantly impacted by COVID during the year, and in both positive and negative ways. As remember, when we were in lockdowns, obviously the performance on the network improved significantly. There's far less traffic on the roads, but as we came out of those lockdowns, we saw that, for example, congestion rose back to pre-COVID levels quite quickly. Public transport usage and performance of the rapid transit networks were obviously significantly impacted, and public transport patronage was significantly lower than in the prior year. I'll just ask Jenny if she'd like to make any comments in that regard, or if there was any questions from the board.
Kia ora, everybody. Nothing to add other than what Mark said. I think it's just an interesting observation that when we are in the COVID space, you can get quite significant change on some of the indicators that we're trying to shift. So it goes to your point, Kylie, earlier about how can we bank some of the gains we've got by being in lockdown to take us forward. But nothing else to add. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, over to the board for any comments or questions. Wayne.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. As Mark said, we've been over this material before, but I think we should as a board recognise the delivery of the organisation in the extraordinary circumstances of last year, and we're getting a repeat this year, aren't we? I think the degree of agility that the organisation showed, adjusting in real time, sometimes day by day, to the changing circumstance, and using all the tools in the toolkit to do that, I think as Mark says, it was quite an extraordinary performance. So I think I'd like to acknowledge that. It's been really, really pleasant to be part of an organisation that's been able to turn things on its head and keep going and actually deliver some outstanding results in the period that was involved. I think the focus of looking after the customer, looking after our supply chain, and looking after our own people, we saw our values really come to the fore with a lot of success. And I think what's also a highlight for me was our sort of quiet investment in technology over a number of years when we applied it to the public transport network to keep people safe, just showed that, you know, if we focus on enabling our customers and through use of good technology and things like that, there's a real strength in that in our transport system working better in the future. So I think that was, I think the first time that was sort of came out, you know, in a public forum really strongly about what our new capabilities are and how they're evolving, and we really need to press on with those as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments? Well, I just wanted to reiterate those, and also, as I have said before, last year was our first full COVID year. It's felt and looked and behaved and is quite different this year, but nevertheless, everything which was achieved last year has actually put us in good stead for significantly different and more complex, including financial challenges in this financial year. I think it also, we need to acknowledge the very significant support that we received directly from the government for some programs and from Waka Kotahi in terms of the top up, particularly around public transport. They had their own extremely significant challenges, including to their whole funding base. And it was, it sort of has established a principle that if we can, we will do the best that we can to retain public transport services with, in these times, because it is actually incredibly important in terms of access. There are some people, in particular, essential workers, and in level 3, those who have to get out and about and use the PT system to actually have a level of service maintained, notwithstanding very low levels of use, is really important. And in particular, I'd like to commend the whole PT operational area, where the challenges of operating with a highly infectious disease have been extraordinary. And we have continued to get global best practice, have been part of global best practice ourselves, and continue to learn because, of course, the virus is not standing still. And some of those lessons we, of course, are applying today as we continue to learn. So over to you, Jim.
Kia ora, Chair. Just a very brief one. I just want to also acknowledge some amendments that were made in the annual report, and particularly around page 42 in relation to social procurement. I thought we'd really downplayed our positive engagement there, and previously we'd made reference to we'd participated in the He Waka Eke Noa initiative, but I was pleased to see that it had been strengthened to say that AT had continued to strongly support supply diversity as evidenced by a relationship with Amotai and their connection with the Auckland Council mandated enterprise focused on social procurement, because our team does a really outstanding job, and they've been recognised quite widely for our supplier diversity engagement and efforts, and I just was pleased that was recognised in the annual report. So Shane, I'll leave that with you to emphasise or pass on to the appropriate members of your team. Thank you.
Can I just hand over to Wayne for a moment?
Okay, so I assume she meant to hand over as chair. Okay.
Yes, I did.
Okay. Are there any other comments on or questions on the annual report? We're all done. Okay. Thank you very much. So we just need to note the report. So everyone's happy to note that. Okay, lots of nodding heads. So that is duly noted. So our next item is the monthly indicators report for October. And so who's doing that one? Mark?
Yeah, okay. I've got that one.
Okay.
Chair. I've got Andrew McGill on the call. I think he should be here. Is he going to pop up?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, here you are. So I think really just, Andrew, do you want to make any comments on this to start with, and then we'll open it up for questions from directors?
Yeah, sure. So just the key things. So this is covering August, the start of our era of darkness. And the key things that just to note for this one, we now have 5 indicators that we're not on track to meet. So that's an increase compared to the previous month. And that's because cycling rates have fallen. And the cycling rates have fallen because of continued work from home and the alert level change. So that's no longer on track to meet the end of year target. So that takes the number not being met to 5, of which the other ones are DSI rates and also public transport boardings. And the public transport boarding ones are for the same reasons. The other thing that I wanted to point out in this report is, as I mentioned last time, we have a number of new indicators for this new financial year. Most of them are not being reported until September, which you'll see at the next board meeting. But there are some which are being reported for the first time, which is under our collaborative partnering objective. And that's around the governing body satisfaction with engagement of AT. And this is a result of a survey which is conducted by Auckland Council. And we didn't have a baseline going into the preparation of the statement of intent for this year because these figures didn't exist at the time it was being prepared, but we've now got them and they're now in there. So they're on page 29 of the report. And I believe the board's probably already received a briefing from Wally on this, but the survey results were actually really positive. Auckland Transport's result looked back the last 5 years, and the governing body and local board satisfaction with AT is at its highest rate in 5 years, which is really positive. And so we're going to be using these figures and reporting on them going forward. But even though they look a little bit low, they are actually quite high. So it's actually a good result for AT, and it showed that AT was more positively regarded than some of the other CCOs. But those are the main things I wanted to point out today that were of note.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you. Okay, so directors in?
I'm back.
Okay, thanks, Adrian.
So are there any comments or questions, please, on the monthly indicator report? Not any hands up. Okay, so that report is received. Let's now move on to the review of the speed limit changes, tranche 1, and a review of how the implementation is progressing.
Tēnā koutou. Thank you, Chair. We have 2 people joining us for this presentation, so I just want to check quickly that we're running a little ahead of time. Just check quickly whether they're online. It does not look like they are yet. Perhaps what I will do is I will do a very brief introduction, and then they will no doubt be joining in the next minute or 2, and they can take it from there. So I might just lead off while they're not here, Chair. The board will obviously be well aware of the fact that we have actually implemented our tranche 1, the vast majority of our tranche 1 speed measures, which were completed towards the end of June last year. They've been in place now for a little over a year, and the board will recall that there was a fairly comprehensive monitoring and evaluation process put in place. to evaluate the effectiveness of those speed limit changes. While we have not completed the monitoring and evaluation, we are now well underway with that process, despite delays being imposed through COVID. But we have done a fair amount of monitoring and evaluation. And what we wanted to do with this report, which is for noting purposes for the board, was just to share with you some of the early insights that we are taking out of the monitoring and evaluation that's been done to date. There'll be two people joining the meeting. Those two are Melanie Alexander. Melanie is our group manager for network management. And then Michael Brown will join us also. And Michael is the road safety engineering manager. He and his team, with the support of the wider business, are the ones implementing the majority of the change and undertaking all of the evaluations. So they'll be joining us shortly. And if it's okay with you, Chair, we will take the report as read, so we won't go through it chapter and verse. Melanie, as soon as she joins us, it will give you a very brief synopsis of what the report entails. No doubt you've all read it. And then very happy to answer questions from the board. So I'll just check and see. Melanie, are you on the call yet? No. Not here yet.
Just joined, I think, Andrew.
Oh, brilliant. Melanie, you there?
I am, yes,
Yes,
thank you.
excellent. Mel, I've just done an introduction, a very brief introduction of, while you weren't here yet, I've introduced yourself and Michael, and I've just shared with the board that you're going to take them through a very brief summary of the noting paper, and then we'll go to questions. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Morena. So today the paper is talking about the initial results from tranche 1 of the speed limits bylaw that we introduced with changes in June 2020. In particular, those are the changes in the city centre and some of our town centres for Torbay, Morangi Bay, Otahu and Orewa, and also a significant number of our rural roads, making up around 10% of our local road network. I should say that monitoring is still continuing, and the results presented in the board paper are for the first year, for those that were implemented in June 2020. And we will be continuing to monitor with reports coming in.
What it was, apparently our teams used to jointly write the paper about 3 years ago, and then...
Sorry.
Well, carry on, Melanie.
Okay. Sorry. So we'll come back with another report in years 2 and 5 to show that trend over time. So there's a comparison to a 5-year average, an annual over 5 years. So we've done about 81% of the roads with the speed limit reductions. We've done about 81% of the roads in that speed limit bylaw change with speed surveys. The rest, unfortunately, had to be delayed due to COVID restrictions, and we'll pick those up again when we're able to. But of those that we have monitored, we've seen a 67% reduction in fatalities on these roads, which is equivalent to around 4 lives saved and 48 less injury crashes. So a pretty significant change due to the speed limit changes. Our findings showed that, particularly on those rural roads, we've seen a 78% reduction in fatalities with a slightly smaller reduction in serious injuries on those roads. And speed changes in general are around 3 to 7 kilometres per hour. And also, we've also been checking on the travel times, because obviously we were aware that for customers, or Aucklanders, that was a concern. But we've not seen a significant increase in travel times. They're around 4 to 10%, which was less than a minute for a 9-minute journey. So some really significant benefits starting to show. In the town centres for Orewa, Morangi Bay, Torbay and Otahu, and for the residential speed management areas, which were Rose Hill in Papakura and Te Atatu South, we actually complemented the speed limit changes by physical traffic calming, speed calming. We also undertook some surveys with residents there to understand how, their thoughts around feeling safer in the environment. And the majority of people and residents that came out said they felt much safer in their town centres, and over 79% of residents in the residential speed management areas felt a lot safer. And there was an additional benefit of an increase in uptake of active modes, with respondents saying that since the changes have been implemented, they've undertaken at least one more active mode journey, and that's for 19% of people in town centres and 35% in residential speed management areas. So that means that people are feeling safer with a lower speed, so they feel more inclined to go walking, cycling or scooting. So there's a double benefit there. So we're really seeing some very encouraging feedback from tranche 1, and we anticipate that this will be fed into the ongoing monitoring, but also feeds into our work on the tranche 2, which the board is considering later on in December. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. And thank you for the excellent presentations, by the way, which was a really good way to pick up the results and the significance of them. So can I've got a couple of questions. I've got 2 or 3 hands up. Let me just get those. Darren.
Thanks, Chair. Firstly, I just wanted to congratulate you. I thought this was the report and result. It's really encouraging, isn't it, to see this coming through. And I just wanted to touch on, I live in Mairangi Bay, so I lived through the changes. And I guess a little bit of frustration in the community seeing it being the disruption. But I have to say, coming out the other side, it's made a real difference. You can really see and feel the safety around the community and right in the township of how it has slowed down traffic, particularly for the vulnerable users and the walkers and cyclists. So well done. I just wanted to say it's fantastic to see. I know it's only 1 year of data, and I saw the press release come out as well, which I thought was positive. So yeah, really encouraging. Well done.
Thanks, Darren. Kylie.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to reiterate those comments of Darren's. Well done. This was a huge amount of work, and it took a lot of courage to do this work. And I think the fact that we've had very good results after 1 year gives us momentum and a catalyst to push forward in terms of what we need to do. If only we could do them quicker, 10% of the roads, particularly given what we can see in the latter part of the report, where we have got very disturbing DSI numbers that we're all very concerned about. So this is really positive. One thing that I did just want to ask about, in terms of Otahu and the survey sentiments, there are some really good positive messages coming back. How do we reach more people to understand what Otahu residents are thinking? I noted that the number of survey participants was quite low compared to the other areas, and also the demographic in terms of, I think, age.
Now, I don't know if you've got a particular answer to that one. That's probably a question, and jump in if I'm not mistaken, probably a question best directed to our campaigns and analysis team in Vanessa's area. I think the observation is astute and on the money, and probably something that we have to reflect on moving forward in terms of gleaning insights and outcomes from those communities further south. I think we tend to see less of a response to soliciting feedback that's not kind of personal face-to-face. When you're trying to get people to respond to surveys, we don't tend to see a large uptake in those areas. So that is something, Kylie, it's a good question, and one we'll need to go back to and work on with Vanessa and the team around how we actually get better uptake and insights in those areas.
Okay, thanks. I think those communities where we're really wanting to encourage what the speed changes are doing, it's particularly important to try and understand what they're thinking. So thank you, that would be great.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I would just comment on, when I look at the way in which we've engaged with the community around the Papatotoi Innovating Streets project. That was a lot more face-to-face contact. Of course, it happened before we went into this lockdown, right? So, but the engagement there and the feedback and the participation we've had through that community and the local board area has been fantastic. If we'd been in a COVID situation and we've had to do a lot of that remotely, I suspect that our results and our outcomes would have been probably slightly different. So I think it's just about spending more time engaging with those local communities in a more proximate way than kind of remotely. So we will take that on board.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew. Tommy.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Melanie. Thanks, Andrew. Excellent news. One thing that really interests me is how these changes affect driving behaviour and the way people drive and their sort of awareness of the surrounding area. And one of the results that I was surprised as good as it was the compliance measure that you've got. So people actually driving under the speed limit has improved considerably. And I always thought that, when you're putting in lower speed limits, it's actually harder for people to enforce or the compliance with the speed limit. So I'm interested to understand that. I see that the big changes are generally in the town centres. So I'm assuming that's where you've put in the speed bumps and things. So it's actually physically difficult to speed. I'm wondering how that compared to the rural roads where there isn't the physical, whether you're seeing the same behaviour change. And linked to that, I guess there's also, an normal question about enforcement and how if there's any enforcement difference on these roads relative to the rest of the network. But it's an exciting result that compliance is improving.
Thank you, Tommy. And I'm happy for Michael to jump in with some of the details behind me. But yes, you're absolutely right. The town centres did have physical traffic calming measures, so speed humps, tables and crossings. So yes, that definitely does help. It helps with driver behaviour if there's those physical measures in there. In terms of compliance on the rural road, obviously we did the speed counts. We do that through a variety of means, but we were seeing the reduction in speed, so 3 to 7 kilometres. And some of these roads we're monitoring previously as well. So yes, there's good compliance in there. Obviously, it could be better. We can't monitor it all the time, and we do rely on our partners in New Zealand Police to do some enforcement. They haven't particularly targeted any of these roads, to my knowledge. But it is something we're conscious of, especially as we roll out more and more of the roads in the network to keep an eye on it. But you're right, it's good driver behaviour is key to this, and it's encouraging to see that people are dropping their speeds and it's being noticed by others. Michael, did you want to add to that comment?
Yeah, just in general, I think sometimes it can take a little while to bed in. And we had one of the roads that was highlighted as where we weren't getting as good results was Bald Hill Road. And we actually monitored that and looked at it. It took almost a year for us to get the speeds down to where we expected them to get to, but we now have generally good compliance. But what it's kind of shown is the differential between those extreme speed limits or those extreme speeds has actually reduced quite a bit. So we're getting a more consistent speed on the road, and it's more aligned to what we were trying to get. So I think it's sometimes we don't just have to react immediately, and it's looking at that monitoring over time. But I can share that, but the graph as it shows you as it gradually comes down and down and down is really quite tells a really good story.
Through the chair, if I can also just add a couple of words to that. Firstly, probably just an observation and probably a word of caution. I think we should acknowledge that our speed program, and particularly Tranche 1, focused on the majority of what I would call the low-hanging fruit, a lot of those self-explaining roads. So in many of those instances, Tommy, the speeds were already at a fairly low and a compliant level. And what we've simply done is come along and put in a posted limit that reinforces, by and large, the speeds that people are already travelling at. Lowering that posted speed limit has had a consequential added benefit of dropping that operating speed, probably as the report articulates, 3 to 7 kilometres even further. So I think we've started off in a space where we've hit the areas that we will get the easiest uptake and compliance. As we travel and do more of the network, we will get to the tail end where you have many of those rural roads which are not self-explaining, not intuitive to lower speeds. Long straights, that will be far more difficult to get speeds down. And in some instances, the task may not be to get speeds down. It might be that we need to engineer the infrastructure up to retain existing speeds, depending on the nature of the roads, the form and the function. So I would just say that this report is about taking away early insights, and the early insights are great, but it is only 1 year in, and we all know that when we focus on road safety trends, death and serious injuries on our network, we do need to look over a longer term horizon than a 1 year snapshot. So while it is a fantastic result, personally, myself and the team, it's great early insights. It's what we would have hoped and expected for the program, but we're not counting all of our chickens just yet. There's time yet for us to continue monitoring this and see if we get a longer term sustainable benefit out of these changes, which we do anticipate getting. But I guess my caution there is not to expect necessarily the rest of the program to follow suit exactly like this one is. That's kind of my key point.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Abby.
I'll echo all of my colleagues' point of view. This is really a positive trend, Andrew. I take your point that there's more to come, and it was a really good paper, and I really appreciated seeing the results of the surveys. And the other thing I appreciated was that the surveys kind of occurred in a sort of holistic sense. So we were also asking people about the extent to which these changes encouraged mode shift. Really positive news around the number of people who are doing more walking as a result. And I thought that's really encouraging, the extent to which people are more prepared to go out and walk when they feel safer in their community. So a really useful insight for some of the other work we're doing. One of my wonderings was, I think the survey, it was a once-off survey that asked people how they felt before and after. And I just wonder if, given we've got a bit more lead time, we could do baseline surveys about how people are feeling now. So that, because I think when sentiment's a bit hard to judge when you say, how did you feel before and how do you feel now? And whereas if you can get a baseline that says, you know, how you're feeling about safety now, and then I just wondered if that gave us a truer sense of the delta between where people start and then where they end up in terms of the changes. Because, yeah, I was just curious about that, I think. But yeah, reiterate others' enthusiasm for positive trends. Well done.
Okay, thank you, Abby, and just some good comments there for you to consider, Andrew. You don't need to respond to those now, but it's a point well made. I think you've already identified the hill's going to get a bit steeper, and so early wins is a good place to start. But yes, we do have some slightly more difficult challenges going forward with the next tranche, and then of course there'll be tranches after that. So that we have just got that will be noted by the board, and that noting monitoring will be repeated after year 2. And you'll take on board, I'm sure, the comments made by the board members. So that's agreed by the board.
Aye.
Yes, thank you. Now I don't think there was any general business. I do have one item, but before we get to that, we do have 3 items for noting, but not discussion. But I did actually think that both the safety dashboard and the pedestrian and cyclist fatality briefings did actually, while we're not going to have a presentation, I did want to make available to the board a time for any comments. So if I can just go to the safety dashboard to start with, a good set of information there for us to deal with. Obviously, some very concerning, while the health and safety area is travelling pretty well, we have got some very concerning issues with respect to deaths and serious injuries on the road. And I did just want to provide the opportunity for any comments on that, which are not otherwise covered in the report. Okay, no comments on the safety dashboard.
Madam Chair, Kylie, you're probably more up to date than I am, but what's in terms of the fatality rate that we're looking at, and we know police resources have been stretched through COVID borders and all that kind of thing. What's the police's view of what's going on? Do they have a view of where things are tracking and why?
Yeah, perhaps I'll ask Natasha that.
Yeah, or Natasha, yeah.
Andrew?
Chair, it's probably better if I answer that one than Natasha, given it's more road safety focused, clearly. Look, in response to the comment, Wayne, thank you very much. Clearly it's a very alarming trend, and what we myself and the team take out of it when we look at the numbers, if you break it down, there's clearly an increase in the DSR trends, particularly at the moment for people within the vehicles, passengers and drivers. Yeah. Is clearly a kind of evolving trend. That's where the bulk of the increase is. And when you look at those specific crashes, in the vast majority of them, causative factors are typically speed and or alcohol related. So, you know, to me, what the data tells us and what the trend is telling us at the moment is the effort that we have placed and the importance and focus we've placed on speed management and on the enforcement effort with our policing partners is absolutely on the money. It's going to speak to and address what I'm really seeing in terms of the current trend, and conscious of not wanting to take a knee-jerk response to anything. But it does reinforce that those are the two areas where we really do need to focus and continue to apply pressure and attention. The speed program, we're looking at how we can redouble to Kylie's earlier points and get more delivery more quickly with a very limited resource, and acknowledging that we have communities and customers we need to bring on a journey. So it's not just a function of people that can do work, it's also making sure you take time to work with communities before you barrel on in. But we are looking at how we can deliver more quickly in the speed management space, number one. In the enforcement space, I mean, you've already touched on it. With COVID and the lockdowns, the police have had to deploy a large amount of their resource to those border checkpoints. And that's been a huge drain, as they've reported to us, on their resourcing. And what they are saying quite openly is it has impacted on the ability for them to undertake or to continue and sustain the enforcement effort that they are committing to. So the sooner we get out of this lockdown and we get back to a state of degree of normality, the quicker we can return to them focusing on those targets and applying a higher dosage to the enforcement effort, particularly as it pertains to alcohol and speed.
So just looking at speed, do we suspect that it's individuals speeding, just individual events, of speeding, or are we seeing an overall increase in speed on the network that's leading to this?
Wayne, the answer to that is probably we're seeing an increase in overall speeds on the network. And I think if you look at the performance reports that have been reported up through the board before, and I think last month we did front up by saying that overall what we're seeing on the network is circa, from memory, I don't have the number, but I think it was around about a 5-kilometre increase in speeds across the whole network. That includes the motorway network, the Waka Kotahi network as well. So we are seeing definitely an increase in speeds across the network, and this is probably symptomatic of the fact that there is far less congestion on the network than what we historically are used to, and potentially, and this is only me hypothecating, potentially people are witnessing or observing that the police presence is also reduced on the network. So one, there's less impediment and it's easier for me to speed. Two, the deterrence engine is not as present or visible as what it historically has been. And I think those two factors during the lockdowns have come together to result in or to kind of play out in the way that we're seeing at the moment.
Is there anything we can do in automated enforcement through speed cameras differently to try and plug that gap?
I think the answer to that is yes, and there's a fair amount of work being done at the moment with the road safety partners, and Nicole might want to chip in and add to this, but there's a fair amount of work being done to look at how we can leverage technology more effectively moving forward and put less of an impact onto police resources. But we're not there yet. I think that's probably a little way off yet. And if I was a crystal ball gazer, I'd say we're probably looking a year to 2 years away in terms of being able to really implement materially covert camera operations. Nicole, you may want to comment. I don't know if you think I'm on the money with that, but I still think that's a little way off.
Yeah, well, legally we can't in New Zealand anyway, so there's a policy issue. So we know from Victoria that the most significant change that was made in the Road to Zero equivalent was the combination of covert speed cameras, and a lot of them, so they have about 4 to 10 times the amount we have, and demerit points, quite significantly elevated demerit points. Neither of those things are currently in New Zealand. We've been working with the ministry to accelerate work on that, but all this legislative change takes, as you know, years, and we've got to get New Zealand support for that as well, because it will obviously be considered by the whole of New Zealand ultimately. So part of our Road to Zero relaunch, which was meant to be happening now, but due to COVID lockdowns in Auckland not really being in a fit state to take on additional messages, as well as the fact we've actually had filming crew that has been locked in Auckland. That's been a challenge. But we will be now launching in January, I think, or February, a new set of messages into New Zealand, and there's 12 programs of work sitting behind that. So we've certainly offered to come to the AT board and talk through all of those 12 work streams. One of those work streams is the speed camera work stream, and that is definitely ramping up. We're looking at taking our speed camera network in New Zealand from 200 cameras to 800 cameras, and we are very, very committed as Whakatahi to pushing this really hard, but it will require political and other support to go through at the levels that will make a difference for New Zealand. Now, what we do know is that Auckland is well placed to put this in to practice as one of the earliest areas, which is why we've been talking, I think, to Andrew and the team, because we'd quite like to trial, and you're obviously taking a big leadership role as a board and as AT in wanting to shift the bar, and Auckland's been nationally leading in terms of some of the things it's been doing in safety. So we're absolutely, I think, working hard. We do have headwinds though, and one of those, and I'm just going to keep repeating it, I mean, there's a lot of focus on the agencies and progress, and policing is actually a really critical part of it, and the policing has been down, and we're all working hard to lift that back up. But actually, the first thing that has to change is our behaviour as New Zealanders. We think speeding is acceptable. And we link it inherently to productivity. We see it as our right to drive these vehicles really fast. The roads are for cars, right? And these are inherent cultural paradigms that are actually out of date and need to start changing. It's actually incorrect as well. You're not more productive if you speed. There's now overwhelming facts for commercial industries that show that not to be the case. So we've got to start changing some of the rhetoric and conversation with New Zealand, and that's what Road to Zero is all about.
Yeah.
So there's a lot happening in this space, and we'll come back and talk to you about it.
Thank you. Abby, you're next, I think.
Thanks, Wayne. It's really exciting to hear, Nicole.
Yeah,
just really reassuring. Yeah, I feel like the rest of the board, these numbers are horrifying, and yeah, I don't like seeing them. I wanted to congratulate the team on the Drive Calmer campaign. That has hit my social media feeds and the other places that I get content. So well done, because I don't think everything necessarily does. It would be really interesting to the extent you're able to hear back on how that's worked. And I'm just really conscious that Nicole's just talked to us about, a national campaign, but I'm, I'm pleased, and I think it's a real leadership position that as Auckland Transport, we've put our own campaign out there, and it's a good one and engaging. It will be really interesting to see if it's having the effect we're hoping. And again, to Nicole's point about needing to change attitudes, that whole idea of driving calmer has got to be part of that. So yeah, I'll be keen to see how, yeah, is it having the impact we'd hoped? What are we seeing in terms of change around it? And, you know, contribution rather than attribution probably, but well done.
Okay, look, I'm just aware of time. So I just wanted to, Darren's got his hand up. So if that can just be our last comment, and then I'm going to make a chairman's call on a couple of things.
Great, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to comment, acknowledge everything everybody's talked about with the passenger and the driver accidents and deaths, but if we look at people on foot, it's actually as an injury, it's the greatest increase of 29%. And I noted in the business report that we were doing a high risk assessment around micro mobility. And I just wondered, I remember noting as well, I think through ACC, that potentially we're underreporting injuries on foot quite significantly. I just wondered, are we looking at anything around the risk assessment or the understanding better the injuries of people on foot as well?
Okay, look, can I will make a chairman's call here. We do have a paper that we're not going to get a chance to have a talk about today, which is the pedestrian and cyclist fatality briefing. Can I ask that particular issue is addressed when that paper comes back to the next board meeting? Okay, so let's do that then. So look, I'm just going to the only general business I'm going to now, we've got the other papers there for noting, but we will want the pedestrian cyclist fatality briefing addressing the issue Darren's just mentioned to come back to the board at the next board meeting. If I can then just actually in wrapping up the open session, I would like to acknowledge the service of Mary Jane Daly. This is her last board meeting as director. Her term is up at the end of October, and the council has appointed a new director, Mark Darrow. Mary Jane has been a very strong contributor to the work of the Auckland Transport Board. She has, in particular, had real strength with respect to finance, audit, and risk, but has actually broadly contributed. And in the time that I've been on the board, has had a very not only insightful views on pretty much everything Auckland Transport does, but she has had a particular focus also on our effectiveness in our programs to address the growing challenges around climate change and decarbonisation of the Auckland transport fleet. And I know that if she had continued on the board, she was going to go to strength to strength in those areas. So she does have a very illustrious governance career, and I'm very hopeful that all of the drives and issues that she has addressed and pushed on the AT board are matters that is as relevant she takes into her other governance roles, one of which is the owner of very large multi mixed-use shopping malls in Auckland and other urban developments. So I'm sure she'll be a good contributor around the transport contribution that they need to support. So look, we'll because of the rather extraordinary times, there is no dinner or drinks. And I do hope that we will have the opportunity to properly acknowledge Mary Jane's contribution to Auckland Transport and to Auckland when we can see each other face to face. But that may be a little way away just because of the all of the then the other pressures of things like Christmas and things like that. So, but we've certainly got that on our list, Mary Jane, if you would make yourself available. So look, with those closing comments, if I can now close the meeting.